20. Sovereign Insanity. In recent years, some have changed their opinion of insanity under the influence of Dr. Thomas Saz, who holds that, except in cases of physical impairment of the brain, insanity is a retreat from responsibility and reality. Although usually the perspective of such men is not Christian but libertarian, their opinion is in line with Scripture. Man's original sin is set forth in Genesis chapter 3 verse 5 as the will of man to be his own God, determining good and evil, law and morality for himself. The insane, thus, are those who have pushed this belief to its limits. They recognize as reality only what their imagination has conceived, and they live in terms of their imagined world. The full realization of their hopes for an entirely self-willed world is hell. Because of this will to be one's own God or sovereign, the logical conclusion of humanistic sovereignties, personal or corporate, private or statist, is insanity. At the same time, there is much in modern culture which sees this insanity, in selective cases, as something great and marvelous. It is seen as genius. In modern art, there is a marked appreciation of the artist as outlaw, as a madman, as a man living in splendid isolation, and so on and on. Basic to the modern artist is his denial of community. He is a loner by choice, because to seek community, or to affirm it, is to deny his uniqueness. To deny community means also denying morality, because morality involves both affirming a higher law than one's own will and also a responsibility to other men. Thus, to reject community is to sever oneself from God and man. This means a life of studied immoralism. We're told that Matigliani was an alcoholic. He threw one mistress, Beatrice, out of his second-story window. When another mistress, Simone, told him she was pregnant, he refused to talk to her. Jean Heberton, a 20-year-old carnival girl, he would drag by her hair across his studio. She bore him one child and was pregnant with another when he developed pneumonia and died. She committed suicide. Utrillo died in 1955 in an asylum. Van Gogh was institutionalized towards the end, and so on. More recently, insane actions by artists have led to publicity and public appreciation at times. Gerald Sykes has called avant-garde art a form of warfare. He points out that in a post-Puritan culture, irresponsibility has chic, responsibility has none at all. Such art not only despises the necessary technique and disciplines of art, but it takes pleasure in displeasure, in the ugly and the revolting. D. H. Lawrence is a case in point with regard to the exaltation of insanity. He was radically under his mother's influence and grew up undisciplined. What he wanted, he had to have. He spoke without restraint about and to people, delivering his hateful comments as divine fiats. One of his favourite remarks was, "With should and ought I have nothing to do." He was the totally spoiled child. As Cecil Gray wrote, "Lawrence could not brook equals. One had to be a devoted disciple, or he had no use for you." He had messianic delusions and staged the famous Last Supper before returning to New Mexico. He spoiled the drama of it by vomiting before it was over. His wife Frida admitted, "Sometimes he went over the edge of sanity," an opinion shared by others. All this, including his physical violence to his wife, seemed only to emphasize his genius status to many, and to increase the adulation towards a man who regularly insulted all those around him, and especially those who helped him. He had tuberculosis for years and died of it, but he refused to acknowledge his condition. Isolation from other people and from the world of work and responsibility is a means of attaining some limited form of contentment in self-will. Moreover, men who are urban and do not have the necessity of struggling to grow fruits and vegetables, grains and livestock, do not experience the dependency on weather and soil which marks the farmer and rancher. In their urban environment, with water, food and electrical power available to them, they lose a sense of dependency. While more dependent on others than the former, they are less conscious of their dependency because it is hidden from them by their money. As a result, they drift easily into the illusion that they are not dependent upon society. Without God, they begin to see themselves as the center of reality, and they regard their feelings and wishes as justifiable, whatever they may be. A woman wrote to Anne Landers about her desire to kill the neighbours, not because I was angry with them, but simply because I wanted to kill somebody. She went to a psychiatrist and reported, "He told me that for many years I had repressed the anger toward my mother and later toward my husband. The stress in my life had triggered the urge to kill." Not the psychiatrist, not the woman, and certainly not Anne Landers called attention to the fact that stress does not trigger the urge to kill. Stress can be very productive at times. Nothing was said about sin as a governing and motivating force. In fact, the column was titled, perhaps by a newspaper editor, "Urge to kill can be legitimate feeling that comes, goes." Because it is held to be a natural feeling, it is therefore a justifiable feeling. It should be no surprise, then, that very strange justifications are routinely advanced since World War II to vindicate murderers and excuse their crime. When the will of man becomes ultimate in his life, man has become insane. His ostensible sovereignty justifies his every act, because his will is for him valid as such. Similarly, because the modern state recognizes no sovereign God as its overlord and law source, the state's fiat will is per se justifiable, whatever the state decrees. The result is a sovereign insanity. This evil has crept into the church, and more than a few adulteresses and adulterers now justify their act as a natural one. Some argue thus, "You mean you've never felt the same urge? The difference between us is that I'm honest about myself and you're a hypocrite." God's sovereign law is replaced by the sovereign will of a fallen man. What we have thus are two anarchistic would-be sovereigns, modern man and the modern state. Two sovereigns, however, cannot coexist with any peace. As a result, both are extending their powers and their self-will. The modern state grows daily more powerful, and modern man grows daily more lawless. For sovereign man, the way of expressing his claim to sovereignty is to defy the law and will of the state. Guardini wrote of man's loss of place in the universe with his loss of place in God's order. We can add that the state too has lost its place in the scheme of things. Both man and the state seek to displace God as the centre. The means of attaining this role as the centre of being is power, hence the voracious hunger of the state for ever-increasing controls over every area of life and thought. Hence, too, we have the war of the sexes, the conflicts between parents and children, and the war between the generations. Such isolation into self-will is a desire for unchallenged sovereignty, and it is a form of insanity. A professor of abnormal psychology described one variety of masochism thus: there are still other known cases of masochism, cases, for instance, in which the individuals affected might be led by the desire for the utmost degradation of themselves to such practices as urolagnia and coprophagia. By these terms we understand, respectively, the drinking of urine and the tasting or eating of feces. The more he can debase his humanity, the happier the true masochist is. The masochist seeks self-atonement to free himself from God and man. Because he pays for his failures, he is free, he believes. Thornton called attention to the fact of self-debasement. This is an important fact. God says of himself through Hannah, "The Lord killeth and maketh alive. He bringeth down to the grave and bringeth up." 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 6. Commentators usually give this a symbolic meaning, which strips it of its plain intention. Hannah celebrates the supernatural power of the Lord. He can literally kill and make alive, bury a man, and also resurrect him. He is the Lord. Men, as they try to be gods, seeks to do the same, hence the attempts to create life or to freeze the dead in the hopes of resurrecting them later by more advanced scientific knowledge. What men hope to do is one thing, what they actually do is another. They find power in killing. It is their means of playing God. In the Soviet Union, Red China, and other tyrannies, mass murders are commonplace. In the West, abortion is the usual means of playing God by killing. God's killing is governed by his justice, whereas man's killing is an expression of naked power, whether by the state or by persons. Not surprisingly, murder has increased in the 20th century, and dramatically so. Killing others is one means of playing God. A sadistic means. Masochism, punishing and killing oneself by degrees, is another. In Thornton's reference to urolagnia and coprophagia, we see one way some people strike at God by defacing and degrading his image in man. These practices and others by homosexuals sometimes go openly with an outspoken hatred of God and hence of his image in man. War is waged against God and against his image in man, in oneself and in others, with a gleeful hatred. This is insanity, of course. When men and nations deny the sovereignty of God and seek to establish their own, all that they finally accomplish is madness. For to depart from God and his sovereignty is to abandon meaning, reason, and sanity. It means choosing death, for he that sinneth against me wrongeth his own soul. All they that hate me love death. Proverbs chapter 8, verse 36. When the love of death governs a culture or an era, its death will soon follow.